Welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance. How are you, Eduardo?
Very well, Damien. How's everything?
It's good. This week, Eduardo, we have some snippets on changes in ownership in Mexican football teams. We have an analysis on the tomato tariffs, which are going to hit Mexico producers hard and also hit American consumers as they're very dependent on Mexican tomatoes. And then I think you're going to end talking a little bit about the meaning behind the recent anti-gentrification protests in Mexico City.
Yeah, sounds good, Damien. We have also some very interesting interviews.
That's right. I was going to mention we end with two great interviews with Julián López Portillo. He's the CEO and founder of Senzai AI, and with Mauricio Sepúlveda, who's the CEO and founder of Arkham Technologies and former CTO at Confio and at PayPal. And both of them are going to talk about AI in Mexico, especially Mexican businesses. How are Mexican businesses applying AI? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? A deep dive into the state of AI in Mexico. So, Eduardo, if you want, we can kick off with some changes in ownership in the Liga MX. It's a subject we've talked about before. As you may know, FIFA is cracking down on multi-club ownership in Mexico and elsewhere to improve governance and integrity. And that's a big issue for Liga MX because it has quite complex ownership structures. This kind of came to a head when FIFA disqualified León from the 2025 Club World Cup for violating multi-club ownership rules. León and Pachuca both belong to Grupo Pachuca, and so León was kicked out, and they lost a lot of money because it's quite a profitable event, the Club World Cup. So what we saw, as you may have seen, is Mark Spiegel's Innovatio Capital acquired Querétaro from Grupo Caliente, the sports betting and gaming company here in Mexico, for about $120 million US. That's about a 5-time revenue multiple. Caliente is also the owner of Tijuana and thereby ends its multi-club holdings, addressing FIFA's concerns. And I think Spiegel is the first US majority owner in Liga MX. We've seen US companies obviously buy in many football teams around the world, especially in the UK with Manchester United, Chelsea more recently, controlled by US investment funds. And this follows, Apollo's much publicized sort of proposed investment in the Liga MX overall, which so far at least hasn't been concluded. But I think one of the stumbling blocks might have been multi-club ownership. So this presumably would be a good thing. Then there have been reports that Atlas, team based in Guadalajara, which is owned by the Orlegui Sports, which also owns Santos Laguna. It's selling Atlas, and it's hired Modus & Co., big U.S. investment bank, and Whale Gotchel as advisors. Orlegui bought Atlas back in 2019, and it won the championship in 2021 and 2022. I think what we're seeing, it's obviously quite gradual, is a sort of institutionalization of Liga MX as bit by bit multi-club ownership gets removed, which is likely a kind of precursor of investment going into the Liga itself. And we're also seeing internationalization with these international funds, specifically Innovatio Capital in this case, taking a share. I mean, the viewer numbers are very high in Mexico, but the monetization lags the viewership. So, once you get sophisticated investors in, they'll probably find ways of making money. And you perhaps, most noticeably from an international perspective, at least, Necaxa got an investment from the Wrexham, from a group of investors, including the Wrexham co-owners. That's the Welsh football team that got made famous in Netflix with Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, who took over that club and helped it get promoted several times in a row. So quite a lot of activity ahead of next year's World Cup, and it seems that Mexican football is going to be kind of gradually entering the modern commercial age, which will make some people happy, and at the same time will no doubt upset many diehard fans who have a more sort of traditional take on how football should be managed. What's your take on all of this, Eduardo?
I'm delighted to hear all these news of foreigners and investment groups coming into Mexico's football league for one reason, Damien. I mean, they have a business model and they will probably professionalize our most watched sport in a way that the current owners haven't. These guys have short-term but also long-term goals. So they might be willing to sacrifice certain short-term revenue or profits to make this a much more interesting league in the long run. And I think that's what has been failing in the case of Mexico. There is a very short-term mentality. Sometimes I get the impression. So I think that by bringing in people that are more focused on the bottom line and on generating better players, probably better scouts and better schools all over the country, there's nothing to be fearful of that. But on the contrary, I think it will improve the quality of the football that Mexicans see and watch and enjoy. And it's only for the best, in my humble opinion as a fan and as a believer in competition. I think it's best to have only one team per owner than two or three or four. It increases the competition level. And so I'm happy that the FIFA has put its stamp on it. Probably they did it too forcefully with Grupo Pachuca, but they probably have learned their lesson. And they will have to do something about it. It's already, the foreign presence was already present a few years ago in La Segunda División at La Liga A. There was a group led by Jeff Luno, the former general manager of the Houston Astros, who purchased with some capital from Houston the team in Cancun. And he's doing a good job. He also has a team in Spain and he's bringing it up all the way to first division. Then he went down. But it's great. This is the way the industry should work. So kudos for these news that we're seeing developed in the Mexican Football League.
True, but we do need competition, as you said. And right now in Mexico, under the current system, there's no promotion and relegation, which is common in South America and Europe, not so in the US. And the concern is if people spend top dollars on clubs, they won't want to accept the possibility of relegation. And as a result of that, we'll keep the current system of a sort of club of Tobies, and the lack of promotion and relegation is one of the many factors why the sort of the quality of the football perhaps is a bit lacking, and the competitive spirit is perhaps not as strong as it should be.
Completely agree with you. I mean, that was a measure that the Mexican owners took a few years ago, and I think it's ridiculous. I don't know if the new ones will be willing to change it. But like I said, in the second league, Cancun is there trying to improve the level, and they might want to come up. And if more investors are in that lower division, they would like to put pressure on the ones at top, and maybe they're more willing to open it up. TV rights and all that are also hugely important, and there is fierce competition in that, and that is also good, I think, in the end.
Yeah, although in the US, promotion relegation isn't the in different sports isn't the standard sort of modus operandi, because there's too much money at stake. So we'll see which way Mexico goes, whether it stays the way it is, which is similar to the US model in that aspect, or goes more to the European model. I suspect it will be this hybrid Mexican American model, and we won't get promotion and relegation, but we will see. Eduardo, I wanted to move on to more news on tariffs, which gets, at least from my perspective, more and more difficult to kind of keep track of everything that's going on. But as you would have seen on Saturday, Trump announced through Truth Social a 30% tariff on quote unquote Mexican exports beginning in August, the same as European Union goods are getting. But then almost immediately, Bloomberg, the New York Times, Politico said, well, actually, that 30% is only going to apply to non-USMCA compliant goods. They quoted Trump officials, not Trump himself, or they quoted them off the record. But that 30% therefore effectively replaces the existing tariff on non-USMCA tariffs of 25%. So 5% uplift on, about 13% of your exports that are non-USMCA compliant. is an effective tariff increase of sort of under 1%. So it's not such a big deal if all of this is confirmed, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen, and it's not impossible that Trump himself doesn't know what he's going to do. Perhaps more worrying are these sector-specific tariffs. We've got, I think right now it's 50% on steel, 25% on aluminium, and then just this week we saw duties on tomatoes, which may be the biggest deal of all, of 17 to 21%. The 30% on if it's non-USMCA compliant, Trump said it was due to fentanyl and cartel violence. So, especially since it's not applying to that many exports in principle, you'd think that some kind of deal could be struck with Mexico, arresting some more drug kingpins or cooperating more, claiming some kind of victory. I think tomatoes is a bigger concern in the short term because it's a $3 billion business for Mexico. Mexico supplies about 90% of U.S. imports and 70% of total U.S. consumption. So if these tariffs go up, tomato prices are going to probably go up 8 to 10% in the U.S., and that's going to hurt the U.S. consumer. It's going to hurt restaurants, especially Mexican restaurants that use a lot of tomato. You as a Mexican, I guess, rarely spend a day without having tomato sauce or tomato in something you eat. So, and then we've simultaneously seen the steel tariff go up. There's talk about Mexico getting a quota that would be exempt from that, but that hasn't yet been confirmed. And then there's a copper tariff of also 50%. Ironically, that actually might help Mexico because copper prices went through the roof when that was announced. And Mexico's a big copper producer, but it doesn't actually export that much to the US and can easily shift those exports elsewhere now at a higher price. And Mexico's largest copper company, Grupo Mexico, has a big copper mines in the US itself through ASARCO. So probably not much of an impact on copper. Doesn't employ that many people, and the increase in copper price will raise revenues. So that one is so problematic. But tomatoes definitely is a huge issue for Mexico's agricultural sector.
Without a doubt, Damien. The only thing that I mention in this topic is the fact that the inflation rate came up a little bit higher in America recently, 0.3%, if I recall correctly, in June. And even though it wasn't a huge move, prices, instead of going down or remaining level, they're beginning to climb up. And Americans don't like that. And I don't know if Trump noticed or saw it, or in his way of seeing reality will take it into account and he might get cold feet about these tariffs. But without a doubt, they will have an impact on consumers, and consumers resent that, especially when they're buying their food or they're going out and eat. And it might be one of those, let's call it taco imposition. Trump always chicken out, and he might extend it. Not the tomatoes have been put in place, but wonder how long they will last if things. The macro picture in the U.S. starts to show negative impacts.
Yeah, that's for sure. Against that, the big winners from this are Florida tomato producers, as they'll get higher prices for their tomatoes, and they're probably putting pressure on Trump, that obviously now has his official residence when not in the White House in Florida, and Florida is a sort of important Republican sort of stronghold. So we'll see if they kind of keep the pressure on to keep these tariffs going. But there isn't really much option apart from Florida increasing its production a little bit, but to buy Mexican tomatoes, they're just going to have to pay more for them. And as you say, that's going to lead to inflation. And the market took a bit of a wobble when that inflation data came out. So I think they're going to have to be quite sensitive to that. And what I wanted to get your view on the gentrification protests. It seems like we're almost the only people who haven't really talked about it. It's been big stories in the New York Times, in Bloomberg. There was a story in the London Times. Why not just give everyone a quick recap of what happened and what we should make of it?
Right. Well, about 10 days ago in Mexico City, I think some local organizations called on to march against the gentrification of Condesa and Roma, two of the most visited areas by foreign tourists in Mexico City, because they called on the march to protest the high prices and the use of places that were used for residential renting as now short-term stays for Airbnbs and all these other platforms that offer people the possibility of renting those spaces for tourists. The protests got out of hand from, I believe, people that are not living in the neighborhood, and they generated some destruction of property and chanted for foreigners to go back home, that they should speak Spanish, as many do, or that they should respect the culture, as they do, I think. But in any case, it got a lot of attention. It's something that's been building up. I live in the neighborhood where the protests took place, and I've seen the change for good and for bad. I think most of it's good. I do believe there is a problem with the rents, not so much with prices of products, because there are many options in the neighborhood. You could have a coffee for 30 pesos or 60 pesos or 80 pesos, or you could have a sandwich for 40 pesos to 295 pesos, as someone said. But I think that there is an issue with the rents for a very small group of houses in Mexico. I think the protest, like we talked about, it's out of proportion because it's only two neighborhoods out of a city of 8 million and a metropolitan area of 18 million. These are very two small areas of the city. But yeah, in the neighborhood, I've seen some buildings that have been evacuated or used more for Airbnbs than for anything else. Yeah, there is an issue. I don't think violence leads anywhere, but we will have to wait and see what the authorities do. They've already passed the law where you're not allowed to rent an apartment for more than 180 days in order to make those properties come back to the residential market, not to Airbnbs, because it's less profitable, I assume. But I don't know how well they're enforcing it. I haven't seen any changes, or I haven't seen many signs of rents in the neighborhood. So I don't think the policy is being enforced properly. But that is a good measure. Many other cities have implemented it, and it has worked. But I don't know how they're doing it in Mexico. And other than that, it's still a very Mexican neighborhood. If you go there on Sundays, there's tons of Mexican families roaming around in the Parque Mexico, Parque España. Lots of things going on in the park that are destined for Mexicans, and foreigners are there as well. So I'm a bit surprised of the anti-foreigner twist that the march took. Because the problem has more to do with the owners of these buildings that have been turned into Airbnbs more than anything else. It's not the ones that are visiting that are creating any problems. They're just coming to a beautiful area of the city and buying goods for many local government commerces that are doing better than before. So it's a bit strange and needs to be handled with care so that it doesn't damage the reputation of Mexico City as a tourist destination, which wasn't a few decades ago, and it is now a primordial destination for many people from the US and from many other countries.
Yeah, I'm in London right now, and I think about 35% of London is lived in by people who weren't born in the United Kingdom, by expats or immigrants. In Mexico, it's estimated that there are about 50,000, which is about 0.25%. So it's tiny, the amount of foreigners in Mexico City compared to places like London or New York. But in the case of Mexico City, it's highly concentrated in these relatively affluent and pretty areas, as you mentioned, Condesa, where you live, and Roma, a little bit Polanco. I think, as we've seen elsewhere, it's reflecting broader kind of discontent, with the cost of living, and foreigners are easy to blame. In the UK, the sort of protests against foreigners are mostly against illegal immigrants who are on a much lower income demographic than the average Brit. In Mexico, it's against wealthy foreigners, so it's quite different to the sort of anti-foreigner protests. I think the protests are very, very small. I think there was something like 15 short stores, 14 stores that were damaged in a city the size of Mexico. It's tiny, and they've therefore been kind of blown out of proportion. There've been sort of 25 foreign stories on this, and very few foreign stories on horrific sort of flooding in Chalco, things that are actually much more meaningful to day-to-day life in Mexico. So again, I don't think it's something that should be blown out of proportion, but Mexico city government does need to address the sort of root causes of this, which is housing, and they need to make it easier to build houses, especially to build houses that go up, vertical housing, so the city stops getting more and more spread out. And if they can do that, then there's more supply, then rents won't go up in the way that they have.
Without a doubt. And Damien, let's not forget about that Condesa and Roma had been gentrified much earlier than the wave of visitors. I mean, it's become a very desirable neighborhood over the past decade or so, or even a little bit more. I moved there 30 years ago, and it was up and coming. And so it's a mix of many, many things. And I think the city authorities could also do much better by making other neighborhoods as nice and pleasant as Condesa, with creating parks and generating green spaces and planting more trees. That makes it a very livable city because of its nice weather year round. So there are issues that need to be addressed, but yes, I think it's a bit out of proportion. The coverage that it's gotten, the problem is there, and it's not new. It's been developing over the years.
Today, we're joined by Julián López Portillo. Julián is co-founder of Senzai, an AI company unlocking hidden value from underengaged and churned customers. Julián, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Damien. Lovely to be here.
Great to have you. Julián has over a decade of experience in AI, which makes him a grandfather in the industry. Yeah. He previously worked as a senior vice president at Affinity, where he led AI strategy for top clients. He's a former UK-based investor, studied maths and philosophy at Oxford University, like me. And under his leadership, Senzai is helping banks in Mexico, telcos, and e-commerce companies boost conversions and win back lost revenue using AI that thinks and acts smartly. So, Julián, let's start with the basic.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit from your experience how AI is being applied in Mexico, and how's that different to how it might be being applied in Europe or in the US and the developed world?
Well, I think there's the biggest gap is between the US and maybe China and the rest of the world. I mean, they are a very significant step ahead. So in the US, you've firstly got most of the research going on. And then you've had the last 10, 15 years of really integrating, let's say, the previous version of AI, which was machine learning algorithms largely. So they've been really embedded throughout all the large enterprises and, going down into the mid and smaller caps. And then in the newer wave of AI with Gen AI, they've just been far more prepared to test it out because they've tried it out for so long. They've been much more open to test out the new technologies, and they know how to test it, how to measure it. They've developed the use cases a lot more so. So from my perspective in LATAM and specifically Mexico, I think that fear still slightly exists. So they're going after the same use cases, but they're a lot more wary to test them out. They've been bitten a few more times by AI companies who've come in and promised massive gains, and their infrastructure isn't quite ready to deal with AI in the same way that a US companies might be. So they're going after the same types of use cases. I think they're just a lot more wary to try and actually implement and deploy them.
What will you tell a large Mexican company when it's thinking of deploying AI, let's say a bank, to be specific? What are the things they should do and what are the things they shouldn't do? What can they expect from applying AI more aggressively than they've done hitherto?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is they need to sort out their data and their data stack as a priority. The biggest constraint I see in most enterprises is that they don't have that fluidity of sharing data with vendors, which can accelerate AI adoption significantly, which leads to them trying to build it in-house a lot of the time, because they just think to try and bring in a vendor is going to take me, 2 years of bureaucracy and getting NDAs signed and getting permits for data to be shared, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they end up building a lot of it in-house. So I'd say the first thing they should do is really kind of build up a process where they can very quickly test out new AI technologies. That's kind of maybe a pre-step to what you were mentioning. But in terms of what they can expect, I mean, what we're seeing right now, the largest gains are coming in productivity gains. So using the kind of new wave of AI and LLMs as co-pilots. That works quite well right now with enterprises who maybe don't have their data set up because their edge benefits, let's say, they're helping humans be more productive and they're human in the loop. So you still have quite a bit of control as to kind of what the AI is doing. So to kind of answer your question on how they should accelerate the process, I mean, they need to basically start off by really focusing on the specific use cases they can implement quickly and they can test out easily without trying to kind of embed AI into their core until they've got their data ready. They should get used to it. It takes time to understand what AI even is. I mean, most executives that you talk to still don't really understand the kind of realities of it, what it means to implement AI, integrating it with the data, those flows back and forth, the fact that it takes time to get ready and to train up. So I think the most important thing is get onto a use case, try it out, test out a couple of vendors, see what your internal teams can do, compare them, and just get used to what it means to deploy AI while you're really focusing on this pre-step of getting your data ready so you can start actually integrating it more into the kind of core systems.
Tell us a little bit about Senzai. I mean, what's your experience been? Have you been able to produce any positive outcomes for clients in pilots, programs?
Well, look, we've got a slightly interesting way of charging, which we call outcomes as a service. So, this is really what AI should be doing. It's meant to be intelligent. And what does intelligence really mean? It means it can make decisions. So if you're looking for a kind of true AI system, you should be getting measurable outcomes from what you've implemented. We continuously measure the impact of what we do. So we personalize the communications that companies have with their clients. And so we continuously measure how much benefit that personalization is actually giving the customer, the company. And so we A/B test it essentially, measure the impact. And we've seen some very decent results. I mean, between 60 and 80% in uplift just from really using AI that's been embedded into the processes and works in a continuous manner with the companies. So it's been very good, very solid.
Julian, in that sense, I assume that what Senzai does is bring an easier mining data element to the banks so that they can make better informed decisions. Am I reading it right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the crux of all AI is essentially taking the data that you have, understanding it and compressing it in a certain way so that it becomes useful for making decisions, right? Like fundamentally, that's all it's doing. Just AI in general is pattern recognition. You need data to understand and create and identify the patterns. So that's exactly right. We're taking interaction level. So every single time you interact with a company, we're seeing what you did, how you did it, what tone you used, how often you interacted, so that we can deliver back to you an experience that matches what you expect from the company, rather than like these generic email blasts that I'm sure you've all received.
Yeah, you know about each client much more than probably the client knows about himself in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so the bank, the telco, could target its products and services for that specific person in the right way.
Yes, that's exactly right. You know, some people expect to be kept up to date. They like being updated by what's happening in the company. They want to be engaged, you know, especially in e-commerce where there's an emotional relationship sometimes with the brand, not always such a functional one that maybe with telcos. You know, and other customers, they kind of want to be left alone, right? You know, maybe to be told when there's a discount that's available to them or a new product. But generally speaking, they can be self-starters who do their own research. And you may actually be having a negative impact by reaching out to them too much, right? It may be actually a source of annoyance rather than informative or beneficial.
When you were telling us about the hurdles that you face in Mexico, it reminded me a little bit about the credit cards, that people were not willing to share their information and that credit card payments online were more difficult. I guess it's the same kind of skepticism that the Latin Americans or emerging market customers have.
Yes.
Here is at the company level. So your case-by-case scenario breaks or helps them be more trustful of what the AI model can do for them, right?
Yeah, I think, look, you know, clearly there's been massive mobile phone penetration in all of LATAM, Mexico, obviously very much included. And we're moving towards a real kind of, you know, digital first experience, right? But we're still a very long way away from it. You know, Latin America, Mexico specifically, functions a lot on cash. They like face-to-face interactions. As you mentioned, there's a mistrust still. It's getting better, but of digital interactions. And you need people to get over that fear. There's online fraud. There are fraudulent calls. You know, it's somewhat justified fear that people do have. And I think the more that you can get them comfortable with understanding that this type of communication can be personal, it can be relevant, I think the more comfortable they're going to get transacting within the kind of digital space where, you know, AI is more kind of natively embedded. So I think all these steps are kind of very, very important along the AI journey. You know, we're only reaching that point of being able to personalize in the last few years. You know, the LLMs really do allow you to do types of personalizations at scale, which were before you had to do in a rules-based way. It's very difficult to encapsulate all these different permutations if you're trying to make rules each time. You know, there are edge cases all over the place. And LLMs have really allowed you to create more fuzzy logic into the rules. So, you know, it can interpret what a customer is feeling maybe at a time when it responds, and it can respond in a sympathetic way. So it's really only in the last few years that there's personalization at scale, which was promised, as Damien said, in the kind of previous eras of AI in ancient times, but never really delivered upon.
Julián, you have raised some money or received some money from High Ventures, the Mexico VC fund that also, I think, big investor in Fintual, the Investec, Mendel, the expense management company, Nuevo Cargo, Corner Shop some years back. And they do a survey, as I understand it, of the state of AI in Mexico, and they have in their latest fund, it's mostly focused, if not totally focused, on AI and in Mexico, Latin America. Above all, what are your conclusions from their latest survey, if you have access to it?
Yeah, I've luckily been given a sneak preview. So breaking news for all the listeners of the podcast and all the data that they've been collecting. They do essentially a survey both for startups, enterprise, and VCs to try and get a grasp of where the market's at in all those three different sectors. And so, yeah, I was looking at earlier today. The thing I find, look, things are progressing, obviously, in terms of AI adoption. And there was a big, big leap, of course, when ChatGPT came out. So you saw that kind of huge investment go in there. It then kind of settled down a bit, and it's growing back up right now. So you've seen steady growth of 10, 20% in absolute terms of AI adoption. Companies are right now at about 40%. 60% of having AI in some processes of the big enterprises. So, adoption's pretty good. I'd say the US is probably closing in on 80, maybe even 90% of AI adoption. The highest adopters who are including AI in most, if not all of the processes is 24%. So, I think Mexico's clearly making a lot of gains. I think the proximity to the US and the interest within the VC space in AI, which I think high VC has been really leading. Yeah, so the 24% of them of these enterprises are already including AI in most of their processes. The interesting thing is there's still 16% that haven't even explored it. To me, is a surprisingly, let's say, large number given the penetration of ChatGPT across the population. Yeah, the trends basically show that Mexico is clearly starting to ride the AI wave. We're still far behind the US and China. And, Brazil is probably still a few steps ahead. We'll see what the AI legislation does to that. That went through, I think the initial phase passed in December sometime, and we're on the secondary laws and the implementation of it. But yeah, so the highlights are AI is moving ahead. They're mainly using it for productivity gains. So about 60% of the companies are doing what I mentioned around helping make the processes more efficient, helping people be more efficient. So you're seeing obviously hiring sometimes go down in the recent graduates, where they're being able to fill a lot of these positions with existing employees who are now being able to take on 2, maybe 3 times the workload. In terms of use cases, interestingly, and I think they're doing probably the right thing here, is they're mainly using it for customer service type use cases. So places where you can scale the interaction between your customers and the company. When they've got questions that used to have to be handled by humans that can be relatively costly, they're now handing it over to virtual agents, especially the kind of lower value calls, right, where they just want an idea of what their account balance is, or they need to make some small changes. So I'd say Mexico is well on its way. The figures suggest a kind of gradual but concerted effort to integrate AI into all their processes, and they're definitely starting to explore more aggressively. Still very low relative to the US, We're still probably a 10th or 100th of what the US are doing, but, it's going in the right direction.
It's a great opportunity, I assume, in that sense. It's just hard to break the resistance.
Yeah.
Now, Julián, I'm going to ask you a funny question, maybe.
Yeah.
Your name, Senzai, is that related to Sensei with an AI at the end?
So, yeah, the inspiration was Sensei, as a kind of teacher.
Exactly.
So one of the things I really wanted to set up a company in Mexico, which was an actual AI R&D company. Like, we're building our own AI. And it meant a lot to me to be able to do it in Mexico. And I thank High VC for the opportunity to do so. And part of that was I do want to start kind of getting companies that we're interacting with and kind of teaching them how to implement AI, how the best practices should work, the importance of it. After 10 years of doing it, I've seen everything under the sun, like complete nightmare scenarios to, successes. Resounding successes. But so the idea was exactly Sensei and then making sense of AI also as part of the wordplay.
I think it's pretty brilliant. Yeah. It gives that feeling like you're going to help me achieve the use of AI. Congrats.
That's the goal.
What kind of problems, Julián, do you think AI in Mexico isn't well suited to solving, and people haven't fully appreciated that there's too much hype about how AI can solve that kind of problem?
Look, the whole agentic space right now is where I see it kind of very overhyped. I'm sure all of you who've been on LinkedIn have seen these companies that have, it's one or two people and then agents kind of doing everything else. And, while it's hyped in the US, where the models are kind of native to English and understand idioms and so on and so forth, implementing that in somewhere like Mexico, where there's a lot of slang, people, talk very quickly, they use lots of different expressions that the AI may not be so quick to understand, make it an even further challenge. So, you need to, while I mentioned before the enterprises are using AI bots for customer service, you do need to be careful there as to not go a little bit overboard, like we've seen a few companies recently, of firing the entire, call center and then replacing them with these virtual agents. So, that's a hype. It's a general hype. Obviously, in Mexico, it becomes a slightly bigger problem. The other bit is kind of in the fintech space. I think there's an underappreciation for things like fraud and non-payment of credits and being able to predict that and use models that have been applied elsewhere in Mexico. I think we've seen it for quite a lot of the fintech space. And the institutions in Mexico don't give you the coverage that you necessarily want in order to be able to do that. And that means that they're trying to apply an AI problem where the fundamental problem isn't necessarily the AI and the models, right? And I think that it happens quite a bit when you're looking at AI, that people think that data can solve every problem, but it's just not the case. The problem may lie outside the actual data. And that's where people really get it wrong.
Got it. So that's another challenge, convincing and helping these companies overcome those fears. But are you thinking of Latin America as well, Julián, in terms of, you mentioned Brazil, that they passed a law. What's the legal framework for the process that you're trying to implement elsewhere or in Mexico itself?
So Mexico's relatively light, if not completely light, on AI regulation. I'd say probably, from my perspective, a good thing. I would say that's ironically probably the best thing to do right now. People aren't very clear as to how AI is going to be implemented, short of these general catastrophic risks that people are pushing from LLMs kind of evolving into these super intelligences. I don't think we're at the epicenter of that. And given that one thing you want to avoid right now when there's already a little bit of resistance of implementing AI into your kind of day-to-day as a company, adding regulation on top of that, I think really helps. Obviously, you don't want to legalize fraudulent activity or, the high-risk activities that the European AI regulation kind of started blocking or really looks at. But, other than that, Latin America tends to be relatively light on regulation. I think a few countries are starting to look at implementing something. But to be honest, I think it's for the best that they avoid it for now until we have a real kind of understanding of exactly where the pain points are. From my perspective, the more the governments can do to facilitate the implementation of AI across the board, the better it's going to be for the economies. Because, one thing that the new LLMs do allow you to do is acclimatize to different countries a lot faster. So you're going to see companies who can expand out into new countries a lot quicker. Translation is now really not an issue. You can scan and summarize documents incredibly quickly so that you can, understand what's going on in different countries. You have access to information a lot faster and a lot more succinct than you used to in the past. The faster we can build up our own AI native companies, the faster we can implement it, the more we'll be able to compete with global companies that may be coming into Latin America. I think if we don't, we'll just get slowly eaten up.
So that was going to be my question. I mean, we've seen in big tech, let's say Meta and Google in advertising have kind of destroyed local advertising companies. All the big AI companies are global, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google. Why should local Mexican AI company with tiny resources, tiny computer power, tiny number of, I assume, sort of PhDs from MIT or Stanford or places like that, why should a local Mexico AI company sort of survive in this globalized world when you can roll out, from San Francisco or wherever you might be in the US or China, a product that you can amortize the research and the computing costs over 190 countries? Sorry for the provocative question.
Not provocative at all. There's still a couple of Oxford brains which aren't US universities, which are in Mexico. So, brains over brawn. So there are use cases focusing on kind of very specific use cases. These big guys aren't looking at it. And if you've got experience in doing it, you've got as good a chance as anyone else. You're completely right on the funding side. I mean, you're looking at essentially 1/10 of the funding if you try and start up in the US versus Mexico. However, I have to say that comes at a price. So that 10x funding also comes with a much more mercenary attitude to kind of growth. In the US, the startups that I see who get such massive funding rounds, they go and start spending all of it because they're encouraged to do so. And that amount of liquidity leads to taking shortcuts when you're building the product and building up your cost base as well. So, there are benefits, obviously. You get access to a lot of talent. You get access to a lot of marketing spend, which help a lot. But it also leads to, poor decision-making at the start, not tracking whether you're actually even a profitable company or whether you're just surviving and growing as fast as possible because you've got marketing spend. So there are disadvantages, but they can be overcome. Secondly, Mexico and Latin America isn't easy to sell into. They have their own nuances. Getting used to in Mexico, for example, the fact that people don't say no almost ever is something that just takes time. You've got to understand that just because someone didn't say no to you doesn't mean that they're not going to do it. And that's a learning curve you just have to kind of go through. So there's a certain amount of tropicalization that needs to occur when you're trying to sell into LATAM. But look, I agree with you fundamentally that at the end of the day, the better product will end up winning. So you've just got to make sure that you're building a better product. You're taking advantage of the fact that, everyone speaks Spanish across the entire Latin America. There are cultural similarities there. You can need to take advantage of the network that you may have built up in LATAM. The combination of all of LATAM is huge and it's growing. The AI gap is higher. So your competition when you're offering services is a lot lower from both internal teams and other vendors. If I'm getting 40, 50, 60% uplift in Mexico, in the US, we'd be looking at 10, So every coin has kind of two sides. Yes, it's more of a struggle at the start. Your contract sizes are 1/10 of what they would be in the US for an equivalent company, lower funding, but your performance and your impact can be significantly higher. You can leapfrog a lot of what the US has gone through and all that capital expenditure and failed experiments. You can apply it in LATAM and have those significant gains, which would be very difficult to do in the US.
Terrific, Julián. I think we're running out of time. Could spend most of the day talking about AI in Mexico, but thank you very much. Best of luck with Senzai. And hope to have you back on the podcast before long.
Whenever you want. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Likewise, Julián. Thank you.
Today's guest is Mauricio Sepúlveda, founder and CEO of Arkham Technologies. a company transforming how companies across the Americas operate through exceptional data and AI software. Arkham is both a software platform and an AI consulting firm rolled into one, helping companies not just understand AI, but actually apply it to drive real results. Before launching Arkham, Mao was CTO at Confio, one of Mexico's top fintechs, and before that, he held senior roles at PayPal in Latin America. He's originally from Venezuela. Mao spent much of his professional life between the US and Mexico, giving him a good cross-border view on how AI and technology is changing the region. Welcome to the podcast, Mao.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Damian. Thank you for the invitation.
Not at all. Thank you for joining. So, Mauricio, tell us first of all a little bit about Arkham. How are you different to other AI consulting firms, and how do you help kind of tropicalize AI to the Mexican market and Mexican specific needs?
Thank you for that question. I think just as a clarification, Arkham is a software product, it's a data platform. And what we do, Damian, it's relatively simple and quite pragmatic. We understand that in order for AI to be effective in the operations of a company, your data has to be properly organized. It has to make sense for you to make decisions and automate processes. So what we did, we built an exceptional data and AI team. I think it's the top talent of data and AI in Mexico. And we built a platform that helps companies first unify and organize fragmented systems and data, standardize this data, and then once that data is fully reliable, then deploy AI solutions to basically obtain a clear ROI from these investments. These solutions can be around accessing insights faster with natural language. They can be around process automation, or they can be around predictive capabilities. So I think our big differentiator is twofold. We build this fully unified platform that covers the end-to-end lifecycle from integrating data to deploying real use cases. And that's why we work with companies like Circle K or Oyamani or the Club America. These companies are actually implementing and seeing strong results with AI today, thanks to our platform. I think the second element that makes us quite different, Damian, is that we do have an element of consulting. We work hand in hand with our customers to implement our solution, to help them build the right data architecture and pick the right models to solve problems that are core to their operations. So we're combining these two elements, software and services, to really help big Mexican enterprises and mid-market enterprises truly make use of AI and truly achieve a clear ROI of AI in their operations. That's what makes us quite different.
Got it. So what makes Mexico different? I mean, how is providing a software platform and integrated with the consulting business different in doing it in Mexico or doing it in the US? How far behind is Mexico than the US?
When you look at the news, it feels that Mexico is behind the US in terms of AI adoption. I think there is a lot of noise today in the AI world, but here's my take. I think that there are pockets of AI adoption that in Mexico are as high or even faster than the US. One of those is software development. If you're a software developer in Mexico, what they're using to code today, they will immediately tell you that they're using an AI-assisted product, whether that is Cursor or Windsurf or any of these IDEs in the software development space. I think AI adoption in Mexico is quite accelerated. Now, when you look at the enterprise and putting aside really large corporations, when you look at the core of the economy, mid-market enterprises and large enterprises, I think the true adoption of AI in actually really making it work within an enterprise hasn't even started, beyond basic ChatGPT adoption. And I think that's the same case both in Mexico and in the US, aside from some corporations and startups that have very specific use cases. True AI adoption of rethinking how a function like sales or a function like operations runs with AI, I think we're in the very early innings of that game. So I think some pockets in Mexico are as equal as in the US, but the core of the enterprise, I think both in the US and Mexico, is just getting started in this AI revolution, if we want to call it that way.
And when you sit down with a company, what do you tell them they have to do to get tangible results or return on investment from AI? And how do those benefits flow to the company, and that the value of the AI stays with the company and not with hundreds of employees becoming more productive by using AI tools at a personal level?
As you said, we work with a lot of CEOs in the Mexican market, CEOs and CTOs. And I think the way that we have approached this go-to-market is, instead of thinking of AI, we sit with CEOs and CTOs and we basically walk them through the success stories that we have had, and immediately they connect that with a business result. So we go to a CPG CEO and he brings in the CTO. We tell them what we're doing with a similar company. And immediately the CEO says, oh, I have this big problem. I have this big forecasting problem. I have this big assignment of orders problem that is completely manual today, that is consuming all of these resources in our company. If we're able to solve that problem, we're going to see a very significant return on the company. So the way that we have approached, and the way I think CEOs should approach AI solutions and this AI transformation, is on an use case basis, is trying to solve one problem at a time. And once you have a clear problem identified, work backwards from what data do you need to solve it? What systems do you need to integrate to solve that problem? And then how does your team will work with this AI solution once the solution is ready to be executed? That's how we have done it. And I think if you do it that way, you will turn from, as you mentioned, a pointed solution that just helps employees become more efficient on a specific workflows. You will turn from that, and you will actually build a system within your company to actually take use cases and step by step, quite completely transform them with artificial intelligence.
Do you think that the kind of local AI consulting firms and software platforms like yourselves will be able to compete effectively against the big global AI firms like OpenAI or Microsoft Copilot or Anthropic or Cloud and so on? I asked that because I read that OpenAI is now also launching a kind of consulting business to help, I guess, implement OpenAI on an enterprise level. Obviously, Microsoft has that through Copilot. I mean, how do you think a firm like yours or other firms at the Mexico level can compete with these giant global companies that are spending $30 or $40 billion?
That's a really great question. Look, the way I think about it is the following. In my opinion, the most effective way for a company like ours to compete is it starts with product. When a company like OpenAI or Microsoft builds a product, they need to build it in such a way that they basically attack millions of companies at the same time. And that makes their product quite standardized, and those workflows quite standardized, and they go to market quite standardized. In our case, we're a smaller firm, what we have done is we have a product that can be extremely tailored to the company's needs, from the data ingestion perspective to the data transformation perspective. We build a product that is extremely malleable. So I think the first step for a company like ours or any other startup in this space is to try to compete on product in the spaces where potentially these other big incumbents are not going to tap into. I don't think OpenAI is going to go to the mid-market Mexican enterprises to build a consultancy firm to help transform AI operations. So I think in those niches, smaller firms have the advantage from a product development perspective because of the speed and the capacity of tailoring the product to those specific areas. And the other area, Damien, I will say, it's on service. Imagine how expensive it is for OpenAI or Microsoft to service a customer in Mexico or anywhere in the US, in Arkansas or in Florida. It's extremely expensive because of the salaries they paid, where they're located, and the setup of their organization. I think a company like ours that is primarily based or formed with Latin American talent, and where you can attract exceptional talent in a country like Mexico, Colombia, or Argentina, we have an enormous cost advantage compared to those global firms. So I think those two elements, a quite unique and differentiated product that is that can be tailored to the needs of your clients, and then be able to recruit talent, local talent that wants to stay in Mexico and use that talent or train that talent to service local customers. I think that's a combination where you can actually go and take the market in the spaces where these big incumbents are just unable to go on target.
That makes sense. I've read that AI models work better in English than in other languages like Spanish. Is that true? And if it's true to some extent, does that put companies working in Spanish or other languages at a disadvantage versus Anglo-Saxon companies? Is there a language element in implementing AI, or is AI basically agnostic between languages?
I think the answer is that's not true anymore. I think the last versions of the models from OpenAI to Anthropic, I particularly use more the Anthropic models, Claude, and the Gemini models. And I query data in Spanish every single day. I build solutions in Spanish every single day, either with those models out of Arkham or within our platform. And the results are insane. I did some cost analysis of our infrastructure expenses this weekend with one of our solutions using Anthropic Cloud 4.0 as a core model, all in Spanish. It took me 2 hours to build a really deep analysis of our infrastructure costs, completely in Spanish, and I got an incredible result that it will have taken me maybe 3 or 4 analysts and a couple of weeks if I didn't have this type of tools. So I think the answer is no. I think the current models with the proper context and the proper functions are performing exceptionally well in Spanish already. And I tell you because I use them on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and my team uses them on a daily basis in Spanish.
And you've worked now at Mexican firms like Confio. You were CTO at Confio for 3 years or so. You worked at American firms like PayPal. How would you compare the kind of quality of the engineers? You're Venezuelan, I understand, by birth at least. How would you qualify the quality of the engineers in Mexico, and when it comes to AI, or in general when it comes to technology, versus those in countries like Colombia or in the United States? Is Mexico producing enough technical expertise? Because even Confio, even though it was a Mexican fintech, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, had a lot of non-Mexican technical people like yourself. Evidently, they felt they could get more talent at a lower cost, finding a talent pool outside Mexico.
I think there is insanely exceptional talent in Mexico. We are called Arkham because we want to be the place where the weird ones come and work, the crazy ones come and work. So I think there's an exceptional level of talent in Mexico, but the density of talent is definitely not the same as in the US. There is no point of comparing the amount of research budget and research universities and the number of universities that deploy exceptional software graduates across the US versus Mexico. And I think that's a problem in Mexico and across all of our Latin American countries, which is, yes, clearly the density of talent, the amount of talent, the talent pool is not the same as in the US because of just the sheer scale of the US market. I'll tell you this, in our case particularly, we have raised 2 rounds of capital, a pre-seed and a seed round. And in a couple of years, with mostly technical talent, we have built a global enterprise level product that I think competes head to head with some of the biggest products out there, such as Palantir Foundry and some functions from Databricks. And it's been 100% done with Mexican talent. So that tells you something, right? That tells you that the peak of the talent, the 1%, the 10% is as competitive and exceptional as the US and any other country. But definitely there is no point of comparison in the amount of density of that talent because of the number of universities that are producing that talent in Mexico versus the US, for instance.
I think there've been no tech IPOs out of Mexico, really very few, if any, startup IPOs out of Mexico, companies that had started up in the previous decade, whereas there have been scores in Brazil, even obviously Argentina, and millions or tens of thousands in the US. And if you look at the stock market today in Mexico, it's very similar to the stock market 30 years ago in terms of its composition. So all of that might suggest that Mexico isn't very open to change and isn't very open to disruption, and might therefore be kind of slow to adapt to this latest change, right? Which is AI. Do you think that's fair? I mean, you're a foreigner. You've worked in Mexico. You've worked outside Mexico. Do you think Mexico is slow to embrace change?
I'll tell you this. I'm not sure if that's happened to you, but have you ever had a conversation with a CEO or a CTO where they told you in Mexico or potentially anywhere, but let's talk about Mexico. Have you ever had a conversation with any of them where they told you, oh, this SAP implementation or this Oracle implementation was a breeze and it was exceptional and it was so easy? I'm sure you will look at like 20 years of history of your conversations that will tell you not one. All of them will tell you it was a freaking nightmare, right? So if you look at the historical context, if you go from the early 2000s up until, let's say, 2 years ago when this AI revolution started, the pinnacle of software was these big ERPs. I think what happened is that these big ERPs generated this massive PTSD in the Mexican market. They traumatized every single CEO and CTO because they were extremely expensive, like $1 million implementations. 2 years to implement the software, and then after 2 years, only 10 or 15% of the features are used at a company. So I'm giving you this long-winded response because I think Mexican leaders are really astute in the sense that when you work in a market where you have so much instability, when you have limited resources, you have to become a really sharp shooter. You have to cut like a knife. You have to make a few number of bets, and those bets need to really work out. So if you look at that historical context, yes, definitely Mexican leaders were slow in adopting SaaS solutions, software as a service solutions, because of the trauma that ERPs generated, and because those inflexible solutions didn't make up for the cheap labor cost that is natural that was natural in the Mexican market. Now, I think that's going to change. I think that 2 years into the game, Mexican leaders, Mexican CEOs, Mexican CTOs, 2 years into this AI revolution, are now turning the corner and say, oh, this is different. This is not SaaS. This is not the ERPs. This is a real transformative way in how things are going to operate moving forward, just like the internet, potentially just like cloud computing. I think the adoption that we're going to see in the years to come is going to be incredibly accelerated in the Mexican market, because now they, as good sharpshooters, now they know that AI will truly transform things, and they will start shooting to obtain those results in their operations. That's my take.
Right, and hopefully with AI, they won't need to spend millions of dollars on Oracle or SAP, and they'll be able to develop an ERP or almost in-house with AI tools at a fraction of the costs. And that's eventually where AI is going to end up, right? It's going to eventually remove the need to have a lot of expensive software. You're going to be able to develop it, with your own data and with your own AI tools supported by companies like yours, no doubt. Mao, I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting listening to you, and very much wish you all the best and lots of success.
Thank you so much, Damian. We appreciate it. Have a good one.
Terrific, Eduardo. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining Next Moves, and I hope you tune in next week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice week, and subscribe to our podcast.